Learning how to read a SOC 2 report is one of the most valuable skills for any security, risk, or procurement professional. These reports can appear dense and technical, but every section serves a specific assurance purpose. The document typically begins with the auditor's opinion, followed by management's assertion, the system description, and finally, the detailed tests of controls and results. Within those results, you'll see the categories covered: security, availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, and privacy, along with the report type, Type 1 or Type 2, and the period it covers. Together, these components form a comprehensive picture of how the service organization manages its commitments. Reading them in sequence builds a layered understanding of trust, scope, and reliability. The management assertion is the organization's formal declaration about the system's design, boundaries, and commitments. It outlines the services in scope, identifies subservice organizations, and states which trust services criteria apply. The assertion also defines the time frame, whether it's a single date for Type I or a period for Type 2, and confirms that management believes its controls are suitably designed and, if applicable, operating effectively. When reviewing this section, verify that the scope matches your use of the service, that boundaries include relevant regions or components, and that subservice disclosures align with your own vendor expectations. The assertion anchors the rest of the report. If its details don't reflect your reality, the rest of the report may not provide meaningful assurance. The auditor's opinion translates evidence and testing results into professional judgment. 4 opinion types exist. An unmodified opinion means the auditor found controls suitably designed and operating effectively. This is the clean, desired outcome. A qualified opinion indicates some exceptions that may affect limited areas of control effectiveness. An adverse opinion signals that controls were not effective in meeting the stated criteria, while a disclaimer means the auditor could not obtain sufficient evidence to form an opinion. Understanding the opinion type helps you determine the level of reliance you can place on the report. Always read accompanying notes that explain what caused any qualification or limitation, since these contextual details reveal whether exceptions are minor technicalities or significant control failures. The system description is the narrative that explains what the audited system actually is. It summarizes services, major components, and data flows, showing how data moves from ingestion through storage and output. It also describes physical and logical boundaries, relevant geographies, and the treatment of subservice providers under either the inclusive or carve-out method. Importantly, this section lists the commitments that controls are designed to meet, such as uptime targets or confidentiality obligations. Reading this portion carefully helps contextualize the testing results later in the report. Without understanding the environment, the control tests can appear abstract. The system description connects them to real operations. When reviewing the included categories, start by confirming that security appears. It is mandatory whenever any category is covered. Then, note which optional categories, availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, or privacy, are included and why. The rationale for category selection should be visible, often linked to customer expectations or service type. For example, a content delivery network might emphasize availability and confidentiality, while a payroll processor might focus on processing integrity and privacy. Confirm that stated commitments, like uptime or privacy compliance, align with those categories. Mismatched categories may indicate that a service's most relevant risks weren't fully represented in testing. Understanding Type 1 versus Type 2 reports helps interpret what kind of assurance is being offered. A Type 1 report provides a point-in-time snapshot of control design suitability, essentially confirming that the right controls exist and are implemented. A Type 2 report covers a defined operating period, typically 6 to 12 months, demonstrating that controls operated effectively throughout that time. Check the period length, any blackout windows, and whether the coverage matches your contractual or procurement needs. If you rely on continuous assurance, a Type 2 report is usually more meaningful, while Type 1 can be sufficient for early-stage vendors establishing initial governance. The Tests of Controls section is the report's analytical core. Each test is tied to a control objective or a trust services criteria reference. The auditor describes the nature, timing, and extent of testing, what was reviewed, how often, and over what sample size. Results are then listed, often stating whether each control was operating effectively or noting specific exceptions. When reading this section, pay attention to test design. Was the sample representative? And did it span the full period? These details indicate how thorough and reliable the auditor's conclusions are. The transparency of this layout enables you to trace assurance from criteria to evidence to conclusion. When interpreting exceptions, treat them as data points, not disqualifiers. Each exception includes a condition, what happened, a cause, why it happened, and the population affected, how widespread it was. The report should note severity, frequency, and whether compensating controls mitigated the issue. Some exceptions are operational noise, single missed reviews, or minor logging lapses, while others reveal systemic weaknesses, like untested backups or unrevoked privileged access. Understanding remediation status and timelines shows whether management addressed issues or deferred them. Translating exceptions into risk terms, impact, likelihood, and exposure, lets you decide whether additional monitoring or contractual protections are needed. Complementary user entity controls, QX, are your responsibilities as a customer. The report lists them to explain what the auditor assumes you're doing, configuring secure settings, enforcing MFA, or reviewing your own access logs. Evaluate whether these QX are feasible for your environment. If your organization doesn't or can't perform them, the SOC 2 assurance weakens. A common mistake is treating QX as advisory when they are conditional requirements. Ensure you understand and can meet them. Otherwise, your reliance on the SOC 2 report may be misplaced. For subservice organization signals, check whether the report identifies any third-party providers critical to the system. It should specify whether they are included or carved out of scope. If carved out, review the provider's own SOC reports and confirm period and criteria alignment. Look for interface controls, those managing data exchange between organizations, and assess whether they are robust. Weaknesses in subservice oversight often appear as reliance notes or exceptions. These highlight where your vendor's vendors could influence your own risk exposure. Finally, verify period coverage and potential gaps. Confirm the report's start and end dates align with your needs, especially if you're relying on it for procurement or renewal. Note any subsequent events disclosures describing significant changes after the audit period. If a coverage gap exists between the provider's reporting period and your current evaluation date, request a bridge letter confirming no material changes occurred. Aligning SOC 2 timing with your contract or risk assessment cycle ensures you're relying on current, relevant assurance. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other prepcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. The distribution and confidentiality section defines who may access the SOC 2 report and under what conditions. These reports are restricted use documents intended for customers, auditors, regulators, and partners who have a legitimate need to assess controls. They often include disclaimers that prohibit public posting or marketing use. Handling requirements may specify secure storage locations, limited distribution lists, or access via encrypted portals. Many organizations watermark or track reports to prevent leaks. Internally, your company should establish a defined intake process for requesting, reviewing, and storing vendor SOC 2 reports. Treating these documents with care respects their confidentiality and preserves the trust between provider and customer. Tracing commitments to criteria is a critical reading skill that connects business promises to evidence. Every SOC 2 report is anchored in the trust services criteria, but those criteria only become meaningful when mapped to the organization's stated commitments, such as uptime guarantees, encryption assurances, or privacy pledges. Review how those commitments appear within the tests of controls. Are they supported by the control design and sample evidence provided? For example, if a vendor claims 99.9% availability, does the report include monitoring data and DR testing to validate it? Take note of residual risks or assumptions, such as dependencies on customer configurations, that affect whether those commitments can be fully relied upon. When reviewing availability indicators, look for hard evidence that supports resilience claims. Uptime metrics should be presented as actual performance data, not estimates, ideally corroborated by monitoring systems. Backup and restore testing demonstrates the ability to recover from data loss, while failover drills confirm continuity under real conditions. Assess whether incident communication timelines and customer notification quality align with contractual promises. Some reports include error budgets or detailed resilience narratives, valuable indicators of operational maturity. Availability controls show whether an organization's reliability commitments rest on tested capability or optimistic projection. Processing integrity cues focus on the accuracy and completeness of system operations. Controls around input validation, reconciliation, and rollback procedures demonstrate how the organization maintains trustworthy processing. Review how defect tracking systems handle discovered errors and whether closure evidence is included. Data transformation audit trails should allow reviewers to trace outputs back to original inputs, ensuring integrity across the processing chain. The report's sampling details, what transactions were reviewed and over what period, show whether the organization's testing reflects real operational workloads. Strong processing integrity evidence means that information customers rely on has been handled correctly, end to end. Reading confidentiality markers helps determine whether sensitive information is protected through its entire lifecycle. Look for references to data classification enforcement, how information is labeled and handled based on sensitivity. Encryption configurations should specify algorithms, key lengths, and management processes, while stewardship notes clarify who controls key rotation or storage. Export controls prevent unmonitored data downloads or sharing, and secure disposal routines confirm how data is destroyed once its retention period ends. Vendor sharing constraints, like NDAs or contractual access controls, should appear alongside any approval workflows for third-party data handling. Collectively, these markers indicate whether confidentiality commitments are systemic and verifiable. Privacy markers reveal how personal data is handled in compliance with law and customer expectations. The report should describe how personal information is collected, processed, retained, and deleted. Privacy notices, consent mechanisms, and rights request handling evidence, like audit logs or response timelines, demonstrate maturity. Retention and deletion configurations should align with documented schedules, while any incidents involving personal data require evidence of response and remediation. When reading, ensure privacy commitments correspond to the service's actual processing scope. A robust privacy section demonstrates not just compliance, but also respect for data ethics and customer trust. Examining access control touchpoints provides insight into identity and privilege management quality. Review how the organization handles joiner, mover, and leaver processes, the timing of account provisioning, modification, and removal. Privileged access approvals should be traceable through tickets or workflow logs, and periodic access reviews must show documented outcomes. Check for evidence of prompt revocation when employees change roles or leave the company. Some reports describe break glass or emergency access events, which should have strong oversight and after-action reviews. Effective access control evidence reflects a culture of least privilege and diligent oversight, core tenets of the security category. Change management and operations evidence how disciplined the organization is in managing its infrastructure. Risk-based approvals should be visible for significant changes, with evidence of testing before deployment. Configuration baselines and drift detection confirm system integrity over time. Monitoring data alerts, incident logs, and postmortems illustrates how the organization detects and learns from operational anomalies. Capacity and performance reviews ensure that systems scale safely without degrading reliability. These controls collectively demonstrate that change does not equal chaos. Rather, it's managed evolution with governance and transparency built in. As you read, always check for consistency across sections. Terminology should match from the system description to the tests of controls, and figures like uptime percentages or incident counts should remain consistent. There should be no contradictions between the narrative and test results, such as claiming encryption at rest in one section while an exception notes missing configurations elsewhere. Dates, names, and control owners should align across the report. Internal consistency reflects both auditor diligence and management accuracy. If discrepancies arise, seek clarification before relying on the report for critical assurance decisions. When comparing periods and providers, trend analysis becomes an invaluable tool. Look for year-over-year improvements in exception reduction, scope expansion, or category inclusion. Note changes in subservice providers, as these can shift risk dependencies. If scope or period lengths vary, understand why. Sometimes it reflects a maturing control environment, other times a reset of evidence collection. Comparing SOC 2 reports across multiple vendors in your supply chain helps identify who maintains stronger governance practices and who lags behind. Maturing trends suggest a proactive culture of continuous improvement, while stagnation signals potential risk complacency. Be alert for red flags and cautionary signs. Repeated exceptions that remain unresolved across periods can indicate systemic weakness. Vague or impractical CUCs suggest gaps in the shared responsibility model. Reports lacking clear subservice detail or boundaries may obscure who actually owns certain risks. Pay special attention to opinion language. Phrases like "could not obtain sufficient evidence" or "certain controls were not tested" can signal material issues. Treat these indicators as invitations for deeper inquiry, not automatic disqualification, but always align your level of reliance with the level of confidence the evidence justifies. Ultimately, knowing how to use a SOC 2 report for decisions turns reading into action. Update your vendor risk register with identified exceptions and note which ones require follow-up. Tailor contract clauses or SLAs to address any observed control gaps. Request remediation updates or additional artifacts when findings are significant. Align onboarding or continuous monitoring processes to the report's results so that oversight remains ongoing, not static. SOC 2 reports are more than compliance paperwork. They are living documents that inform governance, procurement, and relationship management across the supply chain. In conclusion, mastering how to read a SOC 2 report means understanding not just what's written, but what it implies about risk, maturity, and trust. Each component, from opinion to evidence, reveals how an organization performs against the promises it makes. Focus on exceptions, CUCs, and coverage gaps to see where assurance depends on shared diligence. Used wisely, these reports become more than audit snapshots. They evolve into strategic inputs for better vendor oversight, stronger contracts, and more informed business decisions. The next logical step in the SOC 2 journey is examining CC1, governance and culture, where organizational integrity begins its measurable form within the trust services criteria framework.